Okay, welcome back to the final episode, the grand finale of Between Two Webs, the Australian Music and NFT podcast. My name is Ian Rogers. I work at the RMIT University in Melbourne, and I'm joined today for our very last episode in this short series by Dr. Ben Morgan. How are you going, Ben?
Howdy, Ian. I love visiting RMIT and then returning to Monash.
How are you feeling about the last episode? Sad? Relieved?
It got a little lengthy, but oh man, I think there's so much interesting stuff going on with who is actually active in this Web3 space and what's going on with them. And I think the people we found to talk to are really just genuine and interesting, and not evangelists. They're people who are telling me about things that are meaningful.
Yeah, that's right. And this is what we would call pilot work in academia, which is it's research that, this is going to sound insane to people, but it's research that sets up for future research. It's the sort of work that you do where you come in and you say, this looks pretty tricky, and then you do a little bit of research to try and work out what the big questions are that need to be answered, or try and work out what the methodology might be to answer some of the bigger questions and so on. But yeah, we interviewed 9 artists and wrote a report about our experiences and made a bunch of NFTs, like at least 10. I made at least 10, and then each of our artists made one each as well. So yeah, it's been a whole bunch of different things trying to put it all together. Okay. Today I want to talk through the main findings in our report, and we've spent a lot of time trying to unpack what the meanings and the cultural sort of artifacts are within Web3 and NFT culture and how it relates to music in the last couple of episodes. But I thought today, to end things off, what we would do is more formally walk through the central findings in the report as we wrote them as academics, right? I don't think this is going to get too wordy and philosophical, but I guess this is our primer for people on maybe you want to go and read the report that we really put a lot of time and effort into. So I thought I'd just start by reading out a little bit of the introduction of the report. Does that sound okay?
Oh, that sounds wonderful, man.
Okay. Yeah, it's not like you haven't read it 1,000 times. Okay. So based on the experiences of participating artists, Web3's potential remains largely unexplored, we say, especially in Australia, where Australian musicians and music NFTs seem unlikely to attract widespread adoption or displace incumbent music ventures in the near future. For many Australian musicians, Web3 presents challenges and risks not associated with existing markets for music goods, without offering compelling evidence of prospective new audiences or financial gains. And so it's quite a dour finding, unfortunately. It's that from our small sample set, we didn't find a lot of evidence. There were some success stories, but for the most part, we didn't find a lot of evidence that people were going to upturn the apple cart of the Australian music industry in the short term.
Yeah, bringing up those 2 success stories is different from the other musicians, for sure.
Yeah, and more persuasive. So the success stories are great, but what I find extra persuasive across the whole data set is the non-successful, to use that terminology. Yeah. So everyone who's not Dundo and Slowjack, when they're saying things like, I don't know anyone else doing this, or I can't think of a single Australian music NFT, like when those people are telling us that are quite well situated in their respective music communities, when they're surveying the landscape around them and finding absolutely nothing there, I think that's an interesting finding, particularly. I think even within our small data set, that sort of says something.
Yeah. This use of traditional versus the new Web3 sort of style or kind or category, right?
Yeah.
Labeling them, but these not success stories, these are people who've been playing music a long time for the most part, several of them have been operating projects that support them. Like, these are not just people playing music for fun. These are the kind of people that if Web3 companies want to be expanding and targeting working commercial musicians, these are the kind of people they need to be on the radar of.
And in our discussions around the report and the project between you and I and our mysterious silent research partner, Dave Carter, at a Massey University in Wellington, we've settled on this word that we've come back to, which is hesitancy, right? There's this cultural hesitancy around Australian musicians that we suspect is there. We don't have 1,000 participants. We can't roll out these grand proclamations, but we suspect there is this cultural hesitancy that sort of sums up the vibe as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, and I don't know if you're going to play more stuff this episode, but we definitely have some great quotes from people saying why they're reluctant to spend more time researching and learning and teaching themselves how to use these things.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so if cultural hesitancy is the top line finding, underneath that is we have 4 reasons we think as to why this has taken place, and I thought we'd go through them one by one. This is all from the first page of the report. So the first reason driving this hesitancy is a significant and complex amount of technical barriers to entry, including for the artists familiar with blockchain technology. This is interesting, I think, because even our success stories tell us that the technology is difficult, right? So Slowjack says, I did 3 or 4 drops before I started to understand what was happening properly. And Dundo, who seems very technically proficient, has no problem talking about how it's also complex. Like, he doesn't talk about it like it's easy, even though he knows what he's doing. Where did you see this, Ben? Did you see other examples of this or compelling reasons as to why the musicians might be struggling with the technical aspects of this?
Yeah, the musicians were telling me they would go on YouTube.
Right.
And they would use Google. They would try to find information. Now, I do know there's some very recent government resources, the Muse3 through the VMDO site. Yeah. There's efforts being made to get information to people on a reputable government source out there. No one was aware of that yet. That was pretty recent, but where were they finding information? On YouTube. That's what I did as well. And I certainly relate to who do you listen to? There's a lot of rhetoric. There's a lot of talk of, we were hearing about scams and the environment, and we'll probably talk more deeply, but you just get a lot of different information. You don't know. No one said, I figured out exactly what to do from blah, blah, blah.com or something.
Yeah.
There's not a reputable source. And as we've already discussed, there's not Australian success stories or people that they know doing it. And what is this podcast called?
Between Two Webs.
This idea maybe that there's a whole community of people who know this stuff and a whole community of people who don't, and how are they going to merge?
Yeah, I don't know. Or are they going to fork? Yeah, look, I've watched a lot of the VDMO course, taken the course that they offered on music and Web3, and it's really good. It's got a great interview with one of the founders of Serenade, like quite an in-depth interview. I definitely recommend it. I will link to it in the show notes for this. It's a great resource. I wanted to talk a little bit about my own adventures with the technology itself, because I did get into the making a little bit on the project, and because I'm a good cultural studies boy, so I always include my own perspective in my research and my own bias, if you will. And I have to admit that I experienced this. I think that even with 3 years experience in the space, just being a run-of-the-mill user of Web3 can be really aggravating in terms of user experience. I don't know what your specific experience of it was, but the more into it I got, the more aggravating it became. Making NFTs is more annoying and difficult than buying and trading them. And the further I got away from the basics of it, the worse it got. Like it's slow and it's unclear, and the philosophy of blockchain being forever, and like you're writing something to this ledger, and so there's this kind of giant fear always that when you cock it up, it'll be hard to erase it or get rid of it. I just found that the end of this project, when it got to the crunch time and I was really trying to get some of this stuff done, that it drove me nuts. There's a lot of no-code entrance into the space, so people purporting to open up NFT minting, for example, to people who have no training in coding or programming. And let me tell you that a lot of those platforms are really unstable and weird, and I did not find them particularly helpful at all. So long story short, it's still a total insider deal, Ben. I reckon there's no matter what the industry speaks about its own blossoming relevancy and ease of use, not in my experience.
Yeah, I was very surprised. You thankfully spared me from the production side of things. I really concentrated on the interviews and analyzing the findings there. But yeah, what you're telling me about how much harder and more difficult it is than I thought it would be, I'm really surprised to hear that, for one, based on my vision in my head of how it would work. But then again, not surprised because we don't have the buy-in yet from the people who really, I think, know what musicians need right now. Do you think?
Yeah.
I don't want to judge too harshly, but yeah, I'm a big believer that tech people, music industries people, musicians, we're all people who can get along. We're not different kinds of people. There's a bit of this, are you a techie or a musician split? I think we're seeing that plenty of people are musical and tech oriented. But yeah, there are some examples of music industries people here in Australia doing Web3 things. So that's happening. But yeah, we don't yet have the easy to use, easy to do it place to go.
I've heard Web3 talk about it as like the onboarding issue, right? Mm-hmm. It's just hard to get people on board, and that's true. And then I think I've still got a long way to go, I believe. It's still very early. It's years in the making, and it's getting better quickly. To be generous for a second, a lot of this stuff was even better than it was 4 months ago, but still, it can be very chaotic and tricky. I think I told you off air, I accidentally burned $300 worth of cryptocurrency the other night. And that's just not a thing that's going to happen on Spotify. I'm not accidentally going to lose $300 by putting my music on Spotify. Yeah, this stuff is, there's a reason for the caution that goes beyond just it's not cool or it's too new. I think that there's some issues there with user experience and the actual scaffolding of the technology itself at the moment. Okay, this is where we get into the cultural hesitancy. Our finding is that there is limited visibility and cultural hesitancy for Australian artists engaging in Web3 currently. So this is about the fact that, what we mentioned earlier, there's a low visibility of other people doing it. So I take this to mean that none of my friends are doing it. Like, people are looking around, they're like, none of my mates is doing this, so this is not something I have to worry about. But I remember, Ben, when we were writing this up in the report, you had a bit of hesitancy around the finding itself, if I remember. You were pushing back against it and thinking that this might be the finding where we're the most out on a limb, where we had the least amount of data to support this. But I don't know. Tell me, what were you thinking?
I wanted to get really precise about the nuance of who is doing stuff and who isn't. And before we make this like sweeping judgment that there's a widespread cultural hesitancy, just acknowledge that there are people doing it. Because I spoke to the two people who are very genuinely happy about what they're doing there. But then it's, who are those people? What makes them different? And your use of friends is particularly interesting. So the people we know and the music we're interested certainly colors who we end up talking to in some way. And when I reflected on it, the people that I spoke with, I would ask them about why they make music, and the people that I talked a little bit more about social impact, making the world a better place, a little more idealistic social importance of what music can do to society. which is both inspiring and idealistic. And maybe if you're older and maybe a little more cynical, stuff that you associate with youth, those messages still resonate with part of me. And they're definitely why music has always been so interesting and important to me. So yeah, the people I spoke with, I think they're looking for something to make the world better. I'm seeing that a little more. And I think the people that you spoke with, that's where we got the people talking about scams, and they're a little more pessimistic.
Okay, let's take a quick commercial break. Today, our sponsor of the podcast is Clang River by Charm Garden, a dreamy NFT currently available for purchase. See the show notes for details. Here it is. Okay, that was Clang River by Charm Garden. We're talking through the findings of our big fancy report on Australian music and NFTs and Web3 and so on. So the third finding that I wanted to discuss, the third of four, is this. The audience for Web3 offerings are discrete, we write, highly concentrated, and difficult to reach through traditional channels. I think we really touched on this in the last episode with Slowjack and Dundo producing quite sizable revenue streams out of like 100 people or so. In the data, there were not many people who knew how to market and promote an NFT, as it were. Remember all this?
Yeah, in terms of would you hire someone? Are there professionalized services in this space? I would assume someone's trying to get that off the ground somewhere, but no one was aware of it, for one. But yeah, who are these people? So this is the interesting thing. As we've said, you can look up wallets, and I decided to make my name easy to find. But yeah, you don't know who these people are. One question I do remember asking both Slowjack and Dundo is like, what do you know about your audience? Can you see anything? And they may choose to talk to you. And this is where the Discord thing often comes up, where the NFT will let you into a Discord and then you'll start chatting directly. And so that's happening. But unlike streaming, which is here's the demographic, here's where your listeners are, here's what else they listen to, all that sort of user information that is a service provided by the commercial platforms, that's not really here, and it's a bit mysterious. Who are these collectors? And that's the thing. They're not spoken of really in music. Dundo's quite clear about this. These aren't the same thing as music fans. These are people interested in NFTs. I
think we did a pretty good job in the last episode of talking about them as different consumer bases. It's almost the opposite of the Spotify ideal, or the center of the Spotify consumer base is like very different to someone who would buy a high-priced music NFT.
And those collectors very likely can love music. I don't want to dismiss that, but it's different than I'm looking for a way to support a band as a fan in the traditional sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I've got a snippet here that I wanted to play of Branko from the Brisbane band Tape Off talking about trying to shill an NFT. And Branko's a bit of a character, so I feel like he's quite good at selling his work and his band. And rightly so, the band's awesome.
I don't know, if I was to do it today, if you had given me an NFT, I would make a post on Facebook or Instagram about it, or I guess TikTok as well, about it existing. But unless somebody showed me, I've got no idea about how we could actually track what that NFT does, how well it's doing, any of that sort of thing. And promoting it, and I tell some people, but I would assume they'd know what we're talking about, and I'm not sure if you would have to almost write a one-pager that people you would put with the post about what to do with such an NFT and how to value it.
Telling people how to value something is really an interesting idea. I don't know how to value this. I need to learn that. That's very interesting.
If you've ever learned anything about marketing, you've got a problem when you have to teach the consumer how to use the product. Like, it should almost be, you often want it to be self-evident in some regard, or have to done the work to explain what it is before you sell it to them. So you can see the problems compounding a little bit there. Also interesting was Branko's mention of sort of metrics and how we are actually quite acclimated to the idea that we can tell if something's working or not. Like, we're so used to advertising on social media where we have all these dashboards that tell us about what's working and what's not working. And we have streaming sites that give us pretty raw data about what the heck's going on. And this seems like a black box.
Yeah, learning about your audience seems to be completely up to the audience volunteering information. Even, I remember asking Dundo, do you have a Discord space? I forgot to ask Slowjack, darn it. But yeah, I asked Dundo if he had a Discord. He's like, oh, that's a lot of work. I mostly hang out in other people's Discords already, so trying to get them to come to mine, like, yeah, that's what he told me. But yeah, using this in ways that we're used to learn about your audience, that's not happening. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of this sentiment elsewhere in our data too, like amongst the musicians. This sense of either not knowing much about who your NFT consumers are, if you are selling to them, or it just being like a second order problem of a huge magnitude. Like, what do you mean? I barely know how it works. I don't know what to do with it. Oh, and I have to sell it as well. Like, what? You've given me 3 problems and I can't deal with any of them.
No, the privacy people privacy is your big issue. That's one nice thing, is that you're not tracked in the same way. It's the idea that you can be completely anonymous isn't accurate either. As we've discussed, there's certain things that are more transparent. It's wild, right? It's just very, yeah, Branko's clearly expecting something to happen that isn't there, that we've become accustomed to, that this doesn't offer yet.
Yeah, I like that he's so game. Like, he really gives it a red hot crack. Like, he doesn't say, I don't know, which is what many of the other musicians did. He was like, oh, let me think about it.
One small thing, these are musicians, music business people. I first heard about blockchain and music as like a business-to-business solution to solve problems on the back end that I'm not even going to get into. They're things most people who are on the music and audience side don't know about, they don't really care about. But yeah, that's the first use application I saw, is fixing structural problems.
Our final reason why we think there's slow NFT adoption in Australian music is thus. So this is from the report. There's limited access for Australian artists to prominent international marketplaces. Now, we have an outlier here, clearly, in our data, which is Slowjack, who is finding considerable success in sound.xyz, which is not an Australian music marketplace. That's an overseas concern. But from the broader research, surveying the field of the people that we spoke to, and I also remember this clearly from my teaching experiences with the RMIT students in our Bachelor of Arts Music Industry course, that, yeah, we did see a lot of international activity, and then when you go into those spaces, there's no Australians. It's very hard to identify Australians amongst the sort of more anonymous style of products that are in these spaces. They just didn't feel at all like Australians were penetrating those markets and getting to those audiences over there. I'm not seeing like a lot of Australian music burning up the NFT marketplaces, and all of those marketplaces have leaderboards and various metrics by which they top 10s and top 100s and whatever else. So it's just not, I just remember when we explored it with the students in particular, there was just not a lot of Australian kind of stuff there. It's not doing that thing that we desperately need in this country in time eternal, which is that anything that alleviates the sort of geographical or cultural distances that are involved in being a creative person in this country. Do you have anything to add here, Ben?
I don't know. One of the promises of the internet has always been that you can be anywhere in the world and get on it. And I came of age just before globalization as a concept really took off. So part of me is like, oh, these companies, they're based in the US, but who cares? You can still use them. But yeah, there's something missing here. There are companies starting to do things. I think Australia probably, I've heard has a good community of people trying to start businesses. I think the regulatory conditions here are probably favorable still. Is that what you're? Yeah. So why is not more happening yet? Is that a problem with the business side of what's going on, or is it this cultural? I hear these ideas like tall poppy syndrome, cultural cringe, this Aussiness. We've explored that, but I don't think we had enough in this data to really say anything strong about it. But yeah, I guess I would just add that if you're really motivated, like Dundo's clear, like you can figure things out and do it without being in a particular country. But this sense of community and looking around, that's the part missing.
Yeah. That again, this is like when we get the $300,000 study, the big team. But one little piece or complication I'll add to that is there is a bit of a pronounced culture around meeting up starting to creep into Web3, I've noticed. So, and this may just be the mainstreaming of it or whatever it is, but I know that just on my social media, I can remember seeing the Bored Ape Yacht Club. They had a music festival or something, and I was seeing that stuff there. We've had NFT Melbourne. There's like various conferences and symposiums and meetups and so on. So this is just an absolute suspicion and not based on anything other than observation. But those social dynamics often play a big part in cultural formations. And I think that I could see very quickly that this becoming a bit of a disadvantage again, in the same way that in music, just not being able to get that social contact with people that are very important to the broader international makeup of the industry could pose a bit of a disadvantage.
I'll say I've seen three very different things. I went to an NFT or was it NFT Melbourne? I believe they're two different groups, but I went to an event in 2022 that was jam-packed full of people who were interested. I think mostly in collecting.
Right.
But I don't really know, how many people there wanted to produce, or they had colored name tags where you were supposed to identify yourself as a builder or an investor, collector, or a producer. But it was too dark in there. I didn't get a good sense of that dynamic. But yeah, there's a lot of people who are there. I know some people will listen and be like, I know lots of people really interested in here, but it's not intersecting with this group of musicians who've been active a while.
Yeah.
So that's one group I've seen there. Then I've also seen there are meetup groups. It's ironic to say meetup. There are people getting together to talk about Web3 projects. I think that's definitely organized. You can find that if you look for it. I've never been to any myself. So that's going on. But you also clearly have people starting businesses and building things in the space.
Yeah. So you almost had a look at the elusive purchases of NFTs at some of these events. What was the crowd like?
Oh, man. Ethnography.
So you had no ethics clearance to do this ethnography, just your broad observations.
I thought it would be way younger, not crazy looking. That's not a nice thing to say, but I was expecting flamboyant, showy people that I associate with like conspicuous consumption. There were some of those, yeah, but it's also an artsy space.
Right.
You know what? I think I'll put it this way. It was just pretty normal Australia crowd.
Yeah.
There were, I would say I was not expecting many people who were a bit older to be interested in it, and there were certainly older people at the event that I saw. This is all going off one event in 2022 at the peak of the hype.
The hype.
Yeah.
I am seeing, so the desire for status that comes from the high-priced NFTs, I'm definitely seeing that as, well, this is a club and there is a move to try and extract as much value out of that as possible. That's why Bored Ape Yacht Club, they do the in-person events. I think they own a building now. They're setting up like an actual club headquarters that you can go to and things like that. And my gut feeling is it's going to jump out of that sort of anonymized online space, and your token will get you into places like far outside of just the online environment.
I know you've written about virtual scenes and whether they're a thing, but I just go back to what Slowjack talked about, community and connecting with people, and how there's just a genuine, he's meeting people that he likes and he's forming community in this space. I think that's very real, but pretty niche maybe.
Sure. Okay, we're nearly done here, Dr. Morgan. So I thought we'd finish off with a discussion of how we're both feeling about Web3 and Australian music, just generally. In our report, we recommend future funded research in collaboration with Web3 music platforms. That's one of the things we do. We think we need to know more about that B2B layer, and we also need to know more specifically about the music NFT platforms, because we were a bit shut out from them in this research. And then another thing we suggest that might be beneficial is almost the opposite end of the funding spectrum, which is like doing arts funding that targets mentor-based Web3 music production or projects, which is a bit of a rote solution, but in this case, it seems like one that would work pretty well. We found some very experienced people, like a small set of very experienced people, and they seemed quite open to the idea of other people being involved. They weren't carefully guarding their expertise. And I just thought I think they would help someone if the other person would show an interest, and that a funding body came through and remunerated people for their time.
I think what you're really getting at with what you're talking about is this, we keep coming back to it, the social aspect of a music scene and musical culture. That's a different thing than, is this revenue structure more fair, or is this a superior economic system?
And so would that be something that you would want to take a deep dive on in terms of academic research in the future? Is that the juicy bit? Or if I gave you $500,000, what project did you set up?
Well, I'm interested in who's using it and what kind of musical culture does it enable and constrain. To go back to it's not just one thing. Musical culture is many things, but infrastructures, definitely platforms, highlight certain things, and they maybe make it tougher for other things. I think I'm seeing a lot of individual musicians. I mean, I saw Dundo perform live, and he's a one-man show. Mm-hmm. It's not a band that's making NFTs. We have several bands making NFTs in our project, but and this is a bit of the creator economy narrative, which is I think going to be associated way more with YouTube and Spotify and those Web2 perhaps platforms, that it's empowering individuals maybe more than group projects. I think music is not best when it's a group project. I love solo projects too, but I think the culture of a music scene really thrives when people play music together. That's what I'm interested in. Yeah,
that is... We talk a little bit about this in the report, in fact, don't we? We get into the idea that this culture may preference people that are more willing to experiment with how they present themselves to the world. And of course, the freest person in that sort of scenario is the individual, right? Because there's no collaboration, there's no discussion. You just decide that you're going to do a thing and then you go out there and do it. And yeah, I think that it's certainly not confirmed, but it is notable that the two success stories in our thing, they're both solo artists who produce their own work, right? I still think there might be a good research project in just looking at the winners, which is a bit counterintuitive, but we still don't know much about what's happening in the space. particularly. Like, it's still not overly clear. It would be really interesting to do formal research on who are the big buyers, what are they looking for, who are all the dundos that are spread across the rest of the world. Because I'd never encountered dundo at all, or slowjack, previous to this research. I would love to know more about all the American and British and wherever else iterations of these people as well. Who are they? Is there a hidden community of these people that are earning like quite significant amounts of money out of the thing? And we've talked about this off air. Due to the nature of blockchain, we may be able to dig out these success stories in more data-driven ways by looking at the on-chain records of where transactions are going and finding new types of music activity.
Yeah. We've talked about the musicians and we've talked about the B2B, what problems might it be able to solve. Then just on audience side, what's fan culture look like in this space? I can already tell it's a little different.
Yeah.
And then I don't know if things like we mentioned Royal.io, revenue splits. I'm a fan of this group, check them out. And then in the back of your head, you're like, if I listen to this music, this person's going to profit. That injects an interesting element into fan culture, which I don't know. I have a lot of questions about what's going to happen to being a fan and expressing yourself.
Yeah,
Consumption in this space.
It's terrible that we're ending on this note, really, but as you probably know, I'm completely black-pilled on this area. I think that culture is going to just become increasingly financialized, and that I almost think that the scenario you're talking about almost already happens. It's just that we're exchanging social capital instead of financial capital. We spruik our favorite artists. For some reason, it opens up this very cold part of my personality. I don't think that all fan interactions are transactional or anything like that. But I just think that there's very little daylight between, being a financial investor in an artist and being a giant fan of them. I just don't, for some reason, I don't find any friction in this. I don't find it gross at all. I don't know what's wrong with me.
Try to remember, there's something about sharing your favorite band with lots of other people. If you like those other people, everything's great. But then that moment that people experience when someone they've been a fan of outgrows their scene or whatever, and people that you don't understand, why are they fans of this group? These are dynamics of protecting your identity and what it means to be a fan of that group. There's lots to explore there in terms of if you put incentives in the mix, what's going to happen?
Well, we may find out in the near future of Web 4.0. That's the end, really. We've really reached the end of our discussion here. Ben, thank you for all your help and for riding along on this crazy podcast experiment.
I've been learning a ton, and some things I thought I knew didn't turn out to be that way, and some things did. But for the most part, I don't know where things are going to head, and I want to see.
That's the nature of this thing. Before we leave, I just want to do a couple of quick shout outs. Thank you very much to Kirsty Rivers and everyone at the Australia Council for the Arts, everyone at APRA AMCOS who funded the Digital Futures Initiative that supported our work. If you're interested in our work and the finer details of it, and maybe a more structured delivery of it than this podcast, please visit the website for our project. And in the show notes as well, I'll have details about how to find Ben if you would like to talk, or me, and you'd like to talk further about anything that we've raised here today. Thank you very much for listening. It's been a pleasure spending these 4 episodes with you.
Bye, everyone.